Okay, welcome everybody. We've got about 25 people or so on the call at the moment, and it's great that you can join us. And we'll continue to let people in as we go along. My name is Frank Voorhees. I'm the director of the African Wildlife Economy Institute, based at Stellenbosch University. And this is the third in a series of talks that we're organizing on the wildlife economy in Zimbabwe. It's a couple years delayed. We had some of you were there. There was a spectacular meeting in 2019 at Victoria Falls that the Zimbabwean government hosted on the wildlife economy. And then we had 2 years of COVID and lockdown. And now that we're out of lockdown, the series is looking at what next for the wildlife economy in the country. The first one we had was in May, was in Vic Falls, and it was live, and it was on wild foods. The second one we had was on exploring opportunities. That was last June. And now we're running 3 at this time slot this week and the next 2 weeks to keep the conversation going on what next for the wildlife economy in the country. So this one, and I'll in the chat, I'll give you the links to the whole series and the links to this session. This session will look at the topic of what institutional structures do we need to put in place at the community level to really enable communities to get stuck into wildlife enterprises. So what I'll do now is introduce you to our facilitator. We have a facilitator and 3 principal speakers. He'll ask them to speak for a few minutes and then have some structured discussion with our main speakers. And then when the chat box and so on, we'll open it up to everybody into the session. So Shylock, without more of me taking up your time, let me turn it over to you, Shylock Muyengwa, who's going to facilitate the session and introduce you to the speakers and take it from here. So over to you, Shylock.
Let's imagine ourselves sitting under the baobab tree in Masoka there discussing, maybe Mefri thinking of how best can I structure these communities in order to participate in campfire. So it's going to be very informal. I'll not go into people's bios. I think we know each other. But I've got 3 speakers this afternoon, Edson, Chenjerai, as well as Neva. And like Frank has said, there is so much talk about the biodiversity economy. And when we talk of an economy, it essentially boils down to structures, to institutions. And this first part of the 3 series that's earmarked for Zimbabwe is going to be looking at what are the institutional options for Zimbabwean communities to participate effectively in the biodiversity economy. From me, it's just a very short introduction in order to prompt my speakers. If you remember in the olden days, when campfire started, it started in a very loose manner. Communities were asked to self-organize, elect committees, or at times they would agree on a constitution before they could implement. But in short, if you put the story together, what you find, it was quite informal in terms of how it started. A few chiefs in my reading of the history were very instrumental to say, oh, we go in this direction. A lot of things have been happening in the past 35 years, almost 40 years now, around institutional building. I'll not preempt what has been happening. I've got qualified speakers, but I'll just give an overview. Is more recently, we've seen new models emerge around Chiredzi. Chenjerai will speak about that. We've had new models starting to emerge around the community conservancy models, mostly in the Zambezi Valley, as part of the GF6 interventions. Maybe Neva will comment on that and give us insight in terms of where we're going. And then there's a lot of talk around reviving campfire or campfire 2.0, whether CBNRM 2.0, or what those developments are, as well as what are the institutional implications for those developments. And I'll ask Edson to speak around that. So, Chenjerai, you are my first speaker. And I would invite you to just come and tell us, where are we at the moment with regards to community-based enterprises? And briefly, what do we need to do in order to scale up? If you've got good bandwidth, you can switch on your video. If not, we can make do with your microphone. So Chenjerai Zanamwe is currently sitting in Chiredzi, down in the valley, in the Savi Valley. I understand the temperatures are quite hot. But Chenje, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think to start with, for communities to better benefit in the wildlife resource that they have, there must be in proper institutions. Proper institutions must be put in place. And then we can find that we have various institutions that have been put in place. That is from the time when various initiatives, wildlife-related initiatives were mooted by both the government and even at local level. We find that after Campfire came when already there were some initiatives which were done. And looking at the pre-colonial time, we'll find that the communities had their own means and ways of dealing with the wildlife-related issues. You would find that central to that, you would find that the traditional leaders were the ones who were driving the process. And ultimately, any wildlife-related enterprise, it must lead to conservation. The communities themselves were organized in some way to try and conserve wildlife so that they can keep on. You see, the environment was those able-bodied men who had the art and skill of taking, which is the older animals, and like killing the female and the sickly and small animals. So which meant that was going to foster conservation. And then we can realize that this went on for some time, but after colonization of mainly Zimbabwe, you find that when there came this issue of the fortress approach, and then there was also the issue of fences which was brought, and then the fines. So this a bit alienated people from their wildlife resource, and then there was a slight discord on that, which was tried to be put in place post-colonial period for people when they were trying to come back to be in harmony. This was after people realized that the local communities were now regarding wildlife as a liability rather than a resource. So to foster the notion or the mentality that no, wildlife is a resource, people, they were given some form of proprietorship on wildlife. You'll find that various forms were adopted, but the balcon, you see there was King Games concept, which was introduced early 70s. And then there was also early 80s, there was also the Operation Windfall, and then they came Campfire. And then Campfire, it came under the broader picture of the community-based natural resources management. But the mainstay which came, it was the sport hunting is the major mainstay that came with that. And then you'll find that there were structures that were formed, there was need for a committee. The devolution or the appropriate authority was given to the council, which according to the land tenure of Zimbabwe, it is the rightful owner of the land. And in turn, it was first at district level, and then it was first that devolved to ward level, and now it's sitting at village level, whereby the affected villages benefits. That's where we are sitting right now. And then their Campfire Committee, and then the Campfire Committee is responsible for running the day-to-day activities of the campfire. But over and above that, we'll find that within the district, there is the ward ecosystem, which is the ward development committee, which starts from the village development committee, And then the village development committee, it feeds into ward development committee. And then it goes to the district. The same applies. There's another channel, which is the village assembly, which goes to the ward assembly. The village VDCO, it's a ward development committee. This drives development at ward level. So you'll find that these committees, the structure work hand in hand with the ward development committees, seeding the resources, some of the resources to do some developmental activities. And then we'll find that there are also structures like the school development committees. The school development committees, they also get money from the campfire committees. And then you'll find that there are also water point committees within the district, which is responsible for boreholes. And these, they also have some support from the ward from the proceeds from the ward development committees. And then we also have the rural wash or the wash committees, water and sanitation committees, which also run the water related and the hygiene related activities within the ward. And also from time to time, they can also be funded through the proceeds from campfire. So campfire is central with the resources and then feeding into these other committees which are found within the ward. And then within the ward, we'll find that there are also, there's been an emergence of other CBOs, community-based organization, like for Chiredzi Rural District, we have the Malipati Development Trust, which is something closer to the communities, which is responsible for fostering development and creating awareness on natural resource related issues. So you'll find that in Chiredzi, we have Mateke Development Trust, and then we have Malipati Development Trust. We have like the likes of Chiea, which is Chibememe Earth Healing Associations. Though some of them, you'll find that they are not so active due to capacity and funding issues. You'll find that's why the initiative is there. And then over and above that, we mooted other development partnerships within Chiredzi context, where we had a partnership with Malilanga Development Trust for the Mangula Triangle, which is a lease of a land that is about 800 hectares, which is being kept pristine by Malilanga Trust. And within this, they have a committee which they call FACODA, Fair Range Development Committee. Yeah. So this, the FACODA, it's registered as an association which receives the money and distributes it within the 8 villages that is within that. And then we have Malipati Development Trust, which has been formed under council that is now running the Bosman site. So what I'm saying is like we are evolving and innovating on other projects so that we make the cake bigger, so that we have various wildlife and the ecotourism related enterprises for the community's benefit, so that the cake becomes wider and bigger, so that the community benefits better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shenje. So for the audience here who are not well versed with local governance in Zimbabwe, I hope I'll do justice before I bring the second speaker. What Shenje is, I think if I follow his narrative, he's taking us pre-colonial, colonial and post-colonial. And I would use his words is we are seeing institutions evolving and innovating. That is the story of the context in which he's working in. So we've moved from very loose arrangements to committees during the period of campfire, to devolution, and now to more advanced types of organizations that he calls associations and trusts. So Neva, please come on the podium, and I would want you to reflect particularly on the same issues, but without really going into the history, because I think Chenje has done a good overview of sort of institutional evolution in Zimbabwe around resource governance. where we're seeing these institutions being embedded more into developmental aspects of communities. He talks of water, he talks of these other many functions where campfire resources or natural resources generated incomes are then used to fund other aspects of development. So Neva, if you have good bandwidth, please switch on your video. And I want you to follow on the same storyline where Chenjerai left us, just to give us sort of a more contemporary reflection of what is happening around institutions of natural resource governance or of CBNRM within the context of Zimbabwe.
So I think I would like to greet everyone on this platform, and also want to express my gratitude for being one of the speakers on this important issue of biodiversity economy or wildlife economy. I think for us, I would just add on to what Chenjerai has already said, but I will start by saying, for Zimbabwe, we have grasped the concept of sustainable use. And this concept of sustainable use is anchored on the belief that the use of natural resources will result in more efficient protection and management of those resources. But within that concept, you would find that we have also embraced a range of management regimes, which start from fortress conservation to sustainable use itself. So there are some areas that are set aside for fortress conservation, and then there are also some areas that are set aside for sustainable use. So you find that each concept or management area has got a structure that we follow. And if we look at the sustainable use, this is where we talk about the issues of community-based natural resource management, including the campfire, which is a model in Zimbabwe, which has become one of the flagships, particularly in terms of involving communities to in wildlife conservation. So the contemporary issues are that with regard to campfire, there has been some review of the campfire program, particularly to do with the campfire policy itself, so that we strengthen the issues of community participation and community engagement, so that they can benefit from the resources, as well as playing a key role, particularly in terms of assisting in the management of resources that are found within their areas of jurisdiction. So in this regard, I think Edson will also add on that issue where the campfire policy has been reviewed. In fact, I think it is now at advanced stages in terms of finalizing that policy. And also in terms of institutions now, the institutions play a key role in terms of managing the resources, particularly if we look at governance issues. And what has happened so far is that, particularly if we refer to the campfire program, originally we had the RDCs where it was anchored on, because we had no lower structures that can sustain the campfire program. So then what happened is that now, as Chenjerai said, it has devolved to lower levels, where we now look at communities themselves, forming up institutions that can then run with the campfire program, of course, with the assistance of rural district councils and other key stakeholders. So in terms of campfire, I think there's some devolution. If we look at the current setup, there is some devolution, and I'm sure it's not a new thing. But what is happening is that we are now implementing the devolution trust, so that the communities can participate more in terms of running the campfire program and also benefiting from it, so that they can run with other issues to do with campfire. Before we concentrated much on wildlife, on wild animals, but now we are also looking at other natural resources like water. We are looking at issues to do with the vegetation. You look at grasses and so on, which can also be utilized by communities so that they can also benefit more. So there's a diversity now in terms of the activities that communities can partake with regard to the natural resource use. Also, the governance structure itself is also being reviewed under the campfire policy review, so that the even marginalized groups of people who are vulnerable, people who have been marginalized before, can also get involved in the campfire program, and also the businesses or enterprises that are derived from the management of natural resources. We are looking at non-timber forest products as well, where we look at the businesses like beekeeping, for instance. We are looking at issues to do with processing of wild fruits, so that they can come up with maybe some beverages or even some certain types of foods and so on. So we find that in certain areas, people are now benefiting. Recently, I met a community from Chiredzi that was involved in beekeeping, and they are successful in that regard. Of course, there is need for support in terms of capital access, in terms of training, in terms of skills and so on. But what we are witnessing is that communities are now starting to benefit in a number of ways, not just from hunting. Because when you talk of campfire, I find that people just think about the trophy hunting and so on. But what we are saying is that this, apart from trophy hunting, we now have a range of products or a range of activities where communities are now benefiting. And this, I think, dovetails well with the biodiversity economy or the wildlife economy that we are talking about. But what is required, I think, is more improvement in terms of the enablers for that to take place. For instance, there is need to improve more in infrastructure development, particularly if we look at roads, we look at energy issues, that is using of sustainable energy, and also the issue of the government policy that can also be strengthened, and the markets itself. We're also thinking of including the issues of incentives. How do we incentivize communities to benefit more from wildlife resources? We are talking about issue of maybe creating markets in terms of, say, meat products and other things, so that communities can derive the value. And also, one of the key issues that should be looked at, or what we should do now, or what is being done even by the government, is to look at the value addition, where products can now be processed instead of selling raw products. We're thinking of refining those products so that you sell finished goods, and the finished goods can purchase more. I think you agree with me that they can purchase more than raw materials. Therefore, we are talking of creating more employment in terms of the industry itself, creating more employment for our youth, and also creating the markets, and also deriving more value. And also in marginal areas, particularly where agriculture, crop production is not viable, we are saying communities now should think of embarking in conservation, wildlife conservation, and the businesses that derive from wildlife conservation, because it's a viable land use option which we can tap into. But I think we all agree that we need the capital, we need the training, we need the support from all the key stakeholders. I think for that, maybe did I answer most of the questions, or still have something that you need? Oh, I forgot the issue of community conservancies. You know, issue of community conservancies, I forgot the issue. You know, when you talk of the structures, we are promoting community conservancies now. And this could be in partnership with the established operators, or if communities have got the capacity, they can do it on their own. So this is another thing that is promoted, because before we used to concentrate on private conservancies, but now we're talking of community conservancies. And I think it is modeled within the Namibian concept of community conservancies, where communities themselves commit themselves to wildlife conservation and then derive benefits from that. It can be consumptive tourism, non-consumptive tourism, and we also promote issues like aquaculture, even in communities where we don't have much land, where communities they are small landholders. We are saying agriculture is possible in those areas, and people have grasped that concept.
So in your submission, Neva, you've actually introduced a lot of things. I've noted some points here around. What I've picked is, as you were speaking, you're telling us there's greater complexity in terms of the number of enterprises that are being managed now compared to before. That's where you highlight issues of value addition, beekeeping. It's beyond wildlife. The institutions are becoming more inclusive, encompassing gender, youth, women, and all these other aspects. You've talked of the expanded portfolio of rights and so on. And remember, our primary interest here is we're interested in the core institutions managing this in terms of whether we have sufficiently crafted, or we've got good institutions, efficient institutions to manage all these processes. You spoke about, we've created these institutions to manage the natural resources, which is good. So we've got your community guards and so on, they manage centrally by an office. So they could be efficient in that way. And the other way we could look at them is, are the same institutions efficient in generating this additional revenue that you talk about? So in order to answer that question, I'm going to ask Edson to also, I'm not sure if his camera works because we didn't get to see you, your camera wasn't working. But Edson, maybe I think for everyone who's here, is people want you to start from this whole policy, this review that's being talked about. I think people have got so much anticipation to see it and feel it. Just for you to speak from this policy review, what is sort of the vision of these institutions that we're talking about? Maybe we might not go as detailed in terms of what is it that we want communities to be doing and so on, but is there already an indication or an idea of how communities should or would be organized in order to participate? And remember, this is a term being flown around in the Campfire 2.0, CBNRM 2.0. How is the imagination of Zimpax, the imagination of government around the organization of communities? I think that's one of the burning questions people would want you to start from, and then you can also broaden from your experience, your reflection on the broader question that is that we're discussing this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Shylock, and let me pass my greetings to all those that are joining us for this seminar series. So thanks. In terms of answering the question, so I will start to paint the picture on the Campfire review, which was undertaken by the government of Zimbabwe with support from the European Union. And then further, I will just then address what the government of Zimbabwe has been doing and also the strides that has been made to date with regards to ensuring that we enhance the community-based natural resource management program, basically for Zimbabwe, that is Campfire. So as you highlighted, Shylock, earlier, so the Campfire program has been one of the flagship community-based natural resource management programs in Africa and beyond. And this has been in existence almost 34 years now, since 1989. But as a program, it had also its successes and weaknesses. And over the years, many other nations have adopted and even improved further the Campfire program, particularly in the different contexts. So as government of Zimbabwe saw some of the issues that were coming from the Campfire program implementation, which had some issues to do with the reduced successes in devolution. I'm sure when Campfire started, one of the principles and also one of the guiding tools was to say there was need to devolve from the district level, rural district level, to those producer communities, which Chenjerai has articulated very well. But to some extent, this has not fully happened across all the districts. More so, there were issues of human-wildlife conflict, which are much more topical across many of our wildlife estates. But Campfire being covering almost 11% of the broader landscape in Zimbabwe, where communities are dealing with the wildlife management, there was then the need to say, how do we enhance Campfire? Of course, there were other issues to do with the poaching. In some instances, I'm sure many of you were following the poisoning case of elephants in one of the communities close to Wange. and also the issues of the decline in the value of benefits, issues of elite capture. So as such, government commissioned the Campfire Review, which ran from 2016 to 2018. And in that review, which was undertaken through some consultants, and Shylock, you were part of the team which did that survey of the various major districts in Zimbabwe to see how communities perceived, the stakeholders perceived, and also some of the government entities perceived improvement of the Campfire program. And generally, after that bigger survey and also the various stakeholder consultations that took place after that, there were 4 main thematic areas which Campfire was put as for it to enhance its effectiveness would focus on. So the recommendations that came out of the Campfire Review were basically into 4 broad categories or thematic areas. First was the issue of the CBNRM policy and the legal framework, which speaks to the discussion we have here. Second was the issue of institutional framework and capacity building, also speaking to the discussion here. And then the third, which NEFA was, also mentioning the issue of business models, issues of diversification. Last but not least, fourth was the issue of knowledge management, which deals with data and how we manage all the other aspects of Campfire. So now I will just focus more on the first 2 issues of CBNRM policy and the legal structures, and also highlight what strides has been made in that regard. So in terms of the Campfire program, in terms of the policy framework, I think legal structures are key, but they need then to be borrowing or be anchored on a policy framework which is very, very strong. So in that regard, the legal framework in Zimbabwe, coincidentally, also that we had a new constitution from 2013. So there is a program or a government program across most of the policy or legislative, which they are being reviewed to make sure that they match with the constitution, aligned with the constitution, but also infuse a number of other key aspects which Zimbabwe has been dealing with at national, regional, and international levels. So the Parks and Wildlife Act is being reviewed, which is very, very important, as that is the primary act which also informs Campfire. And the wildlife policy of 92 is also being reviewed. And in those 2 main pieces of legislation, the issues of devolution are also being tackled in that regard. Similarly, the issues of ensuring that communities are given much more the impetus and also ways to be capacitated to manage our wildlife are also being addressed in those 2. There is a motion is also from the Campfire Review to have a dedicated CBNRM policy. So the draft is under consideration, and we hopefully we anticipate that we have a separate CBNRM policy, which would then be very key for the Campfire program. In terms of the institutional frameworks and capacity building, which speaks to which institutions beyond the Rural District Council, I think Chenjerai was very clear. Currently, the appropriate authority for Campfire, which delegates the management functions for overseeing wildlife in communal areas, is being done and led by the Rural District Councils. So ideally, they have all that power and make decisions to manage wildlife, which is delegated from the central government. That ideally makes it much more easier for them to make decisions and make sure that communities participate through the elected Campfire committees. So the idea then is to go a level lower, although the RDC will still be much more key to ensure that we form community-based organizations, legal entities at the local level that are able then to oversee the day-to-day administration of Campfire communities. I think Chenjerai gave examples of the Madapati Development Trust, which is a community entity with all the key aspects of managing wildlife. But also there are some trusts that have been formed. For instance, in Chipinge district, under Muyengwa, Ward 30, there is the Jamanda Conservancy, where they formed a trust which have led to the development of a conservancy, something which is more innovative. And once you have a community conservancy, you are now able to diversify to ensure that your ecotourism safari, photographic safari also enhances. You go beyond hunting, which contributes 90% to the Campfire revenue. So this is something which is innovative. And now that the government is reviewing, made provisions that this be reviewed and also incorporate key aspects that we see can actually enable the effectiveness of campfire. But one key thing which we need to, which I will end by just highlighting here, is the issue about the capacity building. In as much as we are moving or pushing that all these elements about community participation in terms of even leadership, youth involvement, gender inclusion, there is need then to ensure that all the communities are capacitated in terms of being able to make decisions, and also being able to ensure that they have all the necessary skills to manage wildlife at a local level. So this is one big area, so that we may have the best framework for legal structures, but what is key also is to ensure that the capacity is there to do businesses which never clearly articulated, the capacity to make decisions about the quotas they have, to be able to survey, to do wildlife surveys, and to be able then to have a benefit sharing mechanism which is much more robust, and where people can actually contribute in that regard. So these are some of the key aspects to ensure that we are able then to revitalize the campfire program and to make sure that it's more effective, and have these community-based organizations beyond the Rural District Council being also able to manage wildlife at a more local level. With that, I do turn to you, Shylock. I may come later on with the additional inputs. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Edson. I see a couple questions that have been posted. Alex Lewis has posted 2 questions, but I'm not sure if I understand the first question in terms of the legal community constitutions or similar. Alex, I'm not sure which immigration you're talking about. You're asking whether these are able to deal with immigration or what, because immigration is more of a national issue. Then maybe your second question is pertinent here, where you're asking whether the campfire model is exportable. I'll ask Chenjerai to talk in terms of how the model has influenced some of the things that are happening in the region. And then you're also asking if there's a basic summary of the flow. Yes, that basic summary is there. Maybe via email to Frank, you can be linked up to Edson to get access to the final campfire review. Maybe can you just address the first part in terms of, so all these institutional complexities that we're talking about, how easily can we move them from one place to the next?
Looking at what we have right now, it's we cannot have one size fit all approach. Like like from one of my favorite economists, he said, happy families that are happy in the same way, but unhappy families that are unhappy in several ways. Which means that there are some institutions which are relevant in other areas of in other parts of the world, and are not in other parts of the world. Looking at the societal frameworks and other requirements, the indigenous people, this we are transcending through various people and the tribes and ethnicities. So you'll find that we have to innovate in such a way that we come up with the right structure that will work at the end of the day. And then even the product itself, we'll find that for campfires, we have campfire facilities. They have their constitutions. For Chiredzi, they even open, that constitution allows them to open their bank accounts, and they use that for any other legal business which they might want to do, going to the bank, opening a bank account, and other transactions. And then you'll find that we have the multi-party development trust. You'll find that the multi-party development trust, it's made to run a lodge, but that one, it's seated in council. It's seated in council in such a way that the council is ceding land on behalf of the communities. And then the day-to-day running, and even that one is meant to catapult the issue of conservation, whereby they create awareness. So you'll find that it's a case-by-case approach where we have, but you'll find that they've constituted, they also have bylaws which are created to, so that these are more formal. You find that we also registered SI 122 of 2016 as a bylaw, which is natural resources and conservation bylaws. So you find that within the communities, they can use the constitution, they can also use bylaws as some of the instruments or legal documents which they use to enforce some of the actions which are used within the area. So you find that these are different as per category and as per sector and in other areas, and depending on the part of the communities, because you find that the Bosman site is a partnership between Gonarejo, because part of the land is ceded from Gonarejo, is like the Manjinji Pen, and also the part of the land, the Bosman site, it has been ceded from council, and it has become it's run on a partner, in agreed partnership that is running that agreement. So you'll find that, and then all in all, we are being guided by the RDC Act. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chenjerai. So in the interest of time, I'm going to put two questions together. Edson should be ready for these two questions. Mike says, not Mike, sorry, Peter. Peter Mills says, the wildlife economy does not necessarily translate to biodiversity sustainability. Are there measures in place to ensure the conservation practices are included in the planning? And then Ali Kaka had said he's interested to hear more on the impact of all this that we're talking about on wildlife numbers in terms of how devolution contributes to better management of natural resources. So maybe Edson, what is the middle line between these two? Where one side says when you devolve, then you've got positive impact on your wildlife numbers, whether it's negative, and also the idea that creating a wildlife economy does not necessarily improve biodiversity, or it doesn't improve biodiversity sustainability, as Peter Mills says it. And then the other question will come to Neva.
Thank you very much. A very interesting question. So what I will do, I will try to address them. I know Neva would chip in, particularly on the same questions also. So the issue of wildlife numbers, a great question, Ali. So what Campfire has done, just perhaps to give the spatial coverage of protected areas in Zimbabwe. So we have 13% of the country, almost 5 million hectares under the Parks and Wildlife Act, and then some portion under the gazetted forest, which are overseen by the Forest Commission. And then we have 50,000 square kilometers, almost similar, under the Campfire program, and then about 1% under private conservation areas. So for Campfire areas, of the 59 districts now, for Zimbabwe, of the rural districts that are covering Campfire, most of them that are very successful are close to the large national parks. And what Campfire has done, it has helped to expand the habitat of wildlife. And what then you would see is that for areas like Wange, Gonarejo, Manapus, and even Matusadona, the elephants would be, the habitat is increased. And by so doing, the overall population of elephants in Zimbabwe over the years has been on an upward trajectory. The last comprehensive national survey in 2014 showed that the country had around 83,000 elephants, which was only 6% growth from the previous survey of 2001. So basically, that has been the case. For large carnivores, particularly for lions, you would see that across the range, the lion population has been fairly stable, and in some cases on the increase. The same goes to the broader range of the larger herbivores. So what Campfire has done is it has allowed acceptance of the wildlife as a land use option among the communal areas. We know that in the communities, they also do other activities such as agriculture, among the others. But there is some, in most of the major Campfire districts, they have dedicated land for wildlife. And some have actually put up conservancies. Like I mentioned of Chiredzi in the Zambezi Valley, we have specific conservancies that are set up for wildlife, which makes wildlife more resident in the communities. So that's something which is positive. So overall, for Zimbabwe, currently, for the first time, we have had a community in Cholocho, which has introduced rhinos. So that's something positive, that now we have rhinos that are being managed within the local communities, which is very, very positive, a good indicator of the successes and also expanding the range for the major species. In terms of whether the wildlife economy does not lead to biodiversity sustainability. So Zimbabwe, our art of wildlife conservation is basically based on science. And we always, when we do our management, is adaptive management. And what has been critical over the years, we were able then to set benchmarks for utilization. More importantly, when we look at the quota allocation, this is done across the country and with the one scientific authority being responsible. But what the key question then is the issue of planning. Integrated planning is key in that we know there are competing claims. I mentioned earlier that the same land where we are also having communities, their interest of agriculture, and in some areas you would find they are mining. So it's more about planning. But at the broader level, as biodiversity, I think there are various elements that constitute that aspect. What we have seen over the years, we haven't recorded species losses at some time. In most of the range, we haven't. But of course, there are some areas where we had some local extinction, which mostly we have been able then to form. If you look at rhinos, we have been able then to form these intensive protection zone. And for the first time this year, Zimbabwe passed the 1,000 mark for rhinos, which is a positive outcome of the biodiversity conservation in Zimbabwe, now that we also have expanded the range into communal areas. So I think it's more like a chicken and egg. What we do need for the wildlife economy is to ensure that we look at the value chain. And then biodiversity in Zimbabwe, even if you look at the tourism in Zimbabwe, most of 70% of the tourism is nature-based, which means wildlife plays a key part in that regard. And critically, the key species are all within the protected area matrix, and which includes communities. And then what we do need is to be able to then to have these indicators, which Zimbabwe has been very much at the forefront, doing because of our as a party to the Convention of Biological Diversity, and also when we look at trade issues, CITES. So these are matrices that we measure, and what we need, we do need. Perhaps the threats that are coming of climate change may put much pressure, perhaps also to the benefit of the wildlife economy. That wildlife economy being so much resilient can actually be one of the areas that we use as a fallback platform if agriculture in other aspects falls. And then lastly, Shylock, perhaps just to, there was a question whether the campfire program is exportable to other contexts. I think, as I mentioned earlier, campfire actually has been one of the main elements to do with the as a case study, early days, in the 80s. So we have seen it being exported, but in a modified version to other countries. The difference with other countries is that in Zimbabwe, communal land, basically the rural district councils have oversight. So communities do not own land. But if it goes to other countries where there is ownership, if you look in Namibia and other countries, those are modifications. But the principles can be exportable to other countries, but the context then would need to be modified accordingly. I may stop for here now. Thanks.
Before I go to Neva, I see very interesting questions, because I'm going to ask Neva to respond to 2 questions. Maybe it takes up to the top of the hour. I would kindly request if people have got time to remain for 10 minutes, because we want to answer the other 2 remaining questions. So Neva, there are 2 questions. I think it's more or less 1 question. Mike says, Mike is impressed by the evolution, but I think he comes back to the question is, so what is the problem? What are the problems now? What needs to be addressed? Which I think are key questions when we're looking at institutional evolution, institutional change. We're coming to the point of what needs to change. And then Colin, I think Colin, your question is also partly answered by what Edson has talked about. So you're talking of the dwindling natural resource base, but I think we'll ask Edson to provide those statistics for public consumption, because the statistics suggest otherwise, because you'd said probably we need to reduce dependence on on these dwindling natural resources. So let's take out the dwindling for now. But obviously your point is, as we diversify, how do we bring in communities into issues of modern entrepreneurship to reduce their dependence, maybe on a mono economy or just on an economy run by wildlife. So I'll rephrase the question for you, Neva. I think I've gone the long-winded way. First, what is the problem? What is it that is left to be fixed within Campfire? And as we're fixing that problem, how can we make communities less dependent on wildlife specifically? That's the second part that Colin also wants answered. Then as you are preparing, please go ahead. I'll then field the questions by Silent and Rudo for our last set of questions. Over to you, Neva.
Thank you, Shylock. I think I will try to answer the questions as presented. One is to do with what is the problem, particularly in reference to the campfire. I think we have been highlighting that the problems, but one of the key problems is to do with the issues of devolution of responsibilities and authority to acceptable levels below the Rural District Council, which is being addressed now by the policy that we talked about. And also related to that, we have got a problem that before this review of the campfire program, you would find that community benefits have been dwindling. If we are to look at when the campfire program started and to date, there has been a reduction in terms of community benefits. Therefore, that becomes a problem in terms of communities accepting the program itself. Therefore, there is need now to address the issue of benefits. But from our point of view, we say, yes, we address the issue of benefits, but also want to look at the cost so that both benefits and costs are shared by the actors in this program. So one of the key issues is to do with addressing the issue of the policies surrounding access and benefits to resources, as well as decision-making processes, where the communities or those groups of people who are involved or who are affected by the program should be able to contribute meaningfully. And therefore, there is need for the structures that we have been talking about to be redefined and then strengthened so that communities can fully participate in decision-making processes. So you'll find that here we are talking of collective action, where we need the communities themselves to be organized, and then so that they can contribute meaningfully to biodiversity conservation. Of course, there's been a question that which you not pose, but it was posed by someone to say that we should move away from relying too much on dwindling resources. But you see, that is a correct concept, a correct thinking. But then you would find that we also need to look at the issue of sustainability or sustainable use. If we are to go by the sustainable use concept, then you see that we address the issue of over-reliance on dwindling resources. And one of the issues that we always talk about is that wildlife does not address all of our economic problems or social problems, but it is just one of those aspects that can contribute to economic development. So together with the other sectors like agriculture, mining, tourism, and so on, we are saying the biodiversity economy can also contribute to community livelihoods in one way or the other. So it is that contribution that we need to focus on and also redefine to say what quantities or the quantum that we are talking about in terms of contributing community livelihoods. So in terms of the problems, I think I've tried to look at the problems that we are looking at, and also what we need to change. So in terms of what we need to change, I think we have already highlighted that the government is already in the process of finalizing that policy. And it is our thinking that when the policy is finalized, we don't just end at policy finalization, but also the implementation of this policy. I think Edson mentioned earlier on that you'll find that at times we have got very good policies that we have, but when it comes to the issues of implementation, then we need all stakeholders now to come into play, because we believe that the government's role is to create an enabling environment. When it creates an enabling environment, then it is up to now to stakeholders to come in and then chip in and make that policy framework work to achieve its desired outcomes. So in that regard, you would find that when it comes to campfire, we have got strong belief that it can also address other issues like the human-wildlife conflict that we've been talking about. I think these days is becoming a key issue in conservation. Sure. Yes, therefore it is an issue that can be addressed, because if you look at the original concept of campfire, it was to devolve responsibility and accountability for natural resource management so that it becomes effective through collective and participatory management of these resources by all actors, including the local communities themselves. Therefore, it is our belief that if we are to go by this concept, then we will be able to address the problems that we have highlighted, especially to do with human-wildlife conflict, issues of land use conflicts, because basically you find that some of these are to do with the incompatible land use practices and also conflicting policy frameworks, which can then be addressed in holistically. That's why it's talked about integrated management, land use management, where all key stakeholders can now then come up with an integrated plan which incorporate all these aspects that we've been talking about.
So there's a statement you make reference to all stakeholders. There's a question in there. Sorry, Prof. Gandiwa, I'm going to put you on the firing line. I'm giving you 3 minutes to answer these questions. Never keeps talking of all stakeholders, but there's a question around how inclusive this process of moving ahead is, because you've got some stakeholders who don't subscribe to sustainable use. The question is, how are those being involved as part of this reform process? Then the other question, Prof, I want you to also quickly answer is how, which is what Silent asks in there, do we have a fund if in case communities want to invest in wildlife enterprises, or is there a fund that's going to be supporting Campfire 2.0 to allow communities to access this fund and build their businesses? Prof. Gandiwa.
Thanks, Shylock. Very, very interesting question. So in terms of how inclusive is our approach to revitalize campfire, I think the government has been very clear, very much open in terms of ensuring that all the key stakeholders are involved. And even during the campfire review was a participatory process where we had communities, all the government agencies, the non-governmental organizations playing a part. So it was more diverse and robust in terms of inclusion. And the recommendations, they had to go through the 3 regional workshops across the country, and then a national validation workshop, which included all the key stakeholders from the full breadth of those that are working with wildlife and also in the communal areas. So that has been the plan and also the execution that the government did. So I can safely say, in terms of being inclusive, this was one of the most inclusive processes that the government undertook. Then in terms of ensuring that, I think the issue of investment. So basically, I think that also ties to the money that comes from Campfire. So during the early days of Campfire, Campfire was also funded by a number of donors, USAID being one, and the other Norwegians. There were much more donors that were involved, including academic institutions, the University of Zimbabwe being one of those that were driving and also supporting the campfire program. But what we have seen during the 2000s, early 2000s, there was withdrawal of donor support from other organizations. This was due to the other socio-political developments in the country. And over the years, what we have seen now is that many other donors, many other development partners are coming back to work with Zimbabwe, as Zimbabwe is now very much open to engage and re-engage with many of the key stakeholders that at one time left the space. So on a yearly basis, on average, campfire yields 2.1 million to communities. And that 2.1 million is actually also spread to 55%. So the distribution at a local level of the 100% that comes to campfire, 55% goes to the communities. This is the money that they use for their own initiatives, or even they can share, or even have community projects. Then 26% of the revenue they get ideally goes back to wildlife management. So this is money that they can invest in terms of ensuring that wildlife enterprises are much more robust. They can put up bows, for wildlife. Even at times they can even put fences where they need to have some key enterprises that relates to some activities. And then 15% goes to council as a levy. And then we have a campfire association, which takes 4%. So in the money that comes from campfire, there is a portion that goes to the wildlife reinvestment and management. But what we have also seen, I can just give you two projects. The World Bank funded the project that is the Wange Biological Corridor project. That project actually put money which also supported communities to build some infrastructure in wildlife areas, and more importantly, to establish some wildlife ranches, one being in Sidinda in Wange. And currently we have some funding from the Global Environmental Fund, that is GEF6, which about $10 million US, which is actually organized in a way that we are going to set up 6 community conservancies in the Zambezi Valley. So there is funds that are coming from the development partners and other the funding agencies. But what we do need still is the need was, as we mentioned, almost 50,000 square kilometers is under campfire. That's a huge chunk of land. So we still do need money. Under the current wildlife policy and the Parks and Wildlife Act, there is sections that are dealing with wildlife funding. And we do hope with that specific fund, we will be able then to reinvest into wildlife areas. The last part, Shylock, is to do with the principle of sustainable use, and whether all the stakeholders we are working with are much more, those that may have divergent views, how are we working with them? So sustainable use is enshrined in the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So it's one of the fundamental documents which anyone who works in Zimbabwe, even the policy alignment we are doing, is aligned to that constitution, which is sustainable use is one of the core functions, and even one of the core aspirations the nation would need to follow. So as Zimbabwe, we have different particular organizations even that are supporting us, who may be anti-sustainable use, but we always ensure that those that come to work with us, they do so on the understanding that we are following the national laws and provisions. And we negotiate a number, I think we have a few organizations that do not even subscribe to sustainable use who are supporting us. Why? Because they come, because I said we have the Parks and Wildlife Estate, the Forestry Commission, the communal land, in the private area. So they can actually choose where to work and whom to work with. But for the Parks and Wildlife Estate, we have other areas where we don't even have hunting, and that gives space for many organizations to come and work with us. But the key aspect at the end of the day is sustainable use. The idea is that the resources should be in abundance, and we do adaptive management. So at times we don't give quotas for species that we know they are not in a good standing, so that we are able then to justify sustainable use. In any case, I think Chenjerai and Neva mentioned that these communities traditionally have been utilizing wildlife, but the idea then is for us as an agency, that is Impacts, to be able then to moderate and to ensure that whatever we are doing it in a way that is sustainable. And so we need then to negotiate at times, convince people that this is something that we have been doing, and we have successes. The populations are not disappearing, which means that we are doing something good with sustainable use. Thank you, Shylock.
Thank you, Edson, Chenjerai, and Neva, for being part of this panel today. I think Edson has summarized the discussion well, but I think from there, Richard says, education is fundamental. So we need to keep educating each other on these issues that we're discussing here. While I'm winding up, I'm going to be inviting Frank to come and just give an official word for closing and then advertise the next series. But I think we've learned a lot here, Edson, Chenjerai and Neva. And some of it, I'm not sure if it's in the public domain. It would be good to share that as part of the summary that Frank will share with everyone on this call. And then there's some questions that we've not answered. I think those are master's and PhD questions, and AWEI is best placed to be inviting those candidates to come to Stellenbosch and grapple with these questions in terms of us to having sort of sound science for the adaptive management that Edson has talked about. I think this brings to a close. We've learned a lot, and we're looking forward to the next two series, as Frank said. But Frank, over to you for official close.
Okay, thank you, Shylock. Thank you, everybody. And sorry we've run a bit over, but it was a fabulous discussion. And I think the discussion shows us that Campfire is not over. Campfire was a leader many, many years ago. And what the discussion today about what was called Campfire 2.0 is incredibly exciting. The really serious look in the country now about the role that communities have played and can play. The diversification of enterprise, wildlife enterprise mention was made of going beyond hunting and looking at plants and non-timber forest products and so on. And as I think as the discussion showed, the real interest of stakeholders in the public sector, the private sector, the communities, academia, to work it out, to work together. So there's a lot of really good discourse going on and a lot of good discussion. Still a lot of challenges. How do we actually institutionally set up wildlife enterprise at the community level? How do we get communities to have more clear ownership in the resources and be able to use them? It's not easy, but there certainly is the will. And I think the discussion we had today was indicating that there's the knowledge in our community to actually tackle this issue and move forward. So exciting times, as I say, for the wildlife economy in Zim. Next week, we'll look at more on the use rights of people to harvest, to fish, to hunt at the local level, and talk and explore what institutionally in a new policy can do to empower local communities to actually have more direct management rights over the resources. But for now, I think we've had enough. Shylock, should we call it an afternoon? Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the week. We see you in a week's time. Bye.